Welcome to Education Insight. I'm Lacey Kendall. This past month, the Toward a Shared Vision Education Summit was held at the Riverside Convention Center. It was aimed at bringing education leaders from inland Southern California together to collaborate, and in many cases, to put those who come from different colleges, universities, or K through 12 in the same room to learn how others might be doing the very same job with different results. So the Education Insight team set up a recording booth at the two-day event, and we pulled a number of local and state leaders in to find out what the shared vision really is and what they agree is good in the Inland Empire, as well as what they say needs to be done locally in our schools and colleges. Dr. Woldab Isak is the chancellor of the Riverside Community College District. After he addressed the crowd of nearly 250, we asked him what important information high-level educators would learn at this summit.
I suppose they will determine that. But what I would expect them to learn, I think, is how to work together, how to collaborate. We live in a region that doesn't have adequate resources. And I believe we can be a lot more efficient and effective by working together. So within my own district, I have 3 colleges. And I always tell them that if each of the colleges worked separately, independently, and they were 100% efficient, 1 + 1 + 1 would be 3. If they were 70% efficient, 1 + 1 + 1 would be 2.1. If they work together, if we create a cohesive and integrated system of working, we could gain a lot from the synergy. We could cut down a lot of wastage of duplication. We can take away unnecessary duplication and create a lot more collaboration. So 1 + 1 + 1 could be 5.
Yeah. You mentioned briefly inadequate resources. What would you say, from your perspective, is the biggest struggle in our schools, our colleges, and our universities in the Inland Empire right now?
Within the community colleges, the funding formula for apportionment that we get per student is less than K-12. So a K-12 student, a primary school student, they would have an apportionment of $12,000 per student per year. In a Cal State, it would be about $18,500. In the UCs, it would be about $33,000. In the community college, it's only $8,000. So we're very short resourced. Our students also don't get a lot of financial aid. When you look at Cal Grant, which is the same as Pell Grant, first I wanted to say that 60% of all higher education students in California are community college students.
Yeah.
We have nearly 2 million. And yet of the Cal Grant pot, almost 80% goes to the Cal States and UCs, and only 9.5% comes to us. And the rest of it goes to the non-profit organizations like, Loma Linda, Cal Baptist, Redland, and the rest. So we're short.
What do we need to do for that to change?
Well, first, I think that the inequities in funding has to be corrected. As I said, when we talk about inequities, it's at various levels. It is not only within, but it's also between systems.
The national assessment, I'm going off on a different topic here because this just came out in the news. The National Assessment of Education Progress, often called the Nation's Report Card, just came out. And it ranked California at the very top in regards to how well our schools did during the pandemic. And that's as compared to other states. From your angle, what did we get right on that? What did we get right?
First I must say I'm very happy that that's what came out to be the outcome. But, sometimes you shouldn't celebrate it too much. because it may not be a measure of how excellent you are, it might be how poorly others did. So I believe that during that period, there was a lot of loss of learning.
Yeah.
Because the K-12 were not fully prepared to transition immediately to the online. But I think that I don't know about the other states, but the collaboration between the various educational sectors, between community colleges and the K-12, still worked very well even during the pandemic. In fact, during the pandemic, we showed much greater solidarity.
Yeah.
We were able to do a lot more together than we did in normal times. So I hope that that's an outcome of us learning how to work together.
Alicia Velasquez was at the Riverside event to learn how to improve her office at UCR, where she oversees community outreach programs. I asked her to describe UCR's education outreach efforts and how that helps our students.
Yeah, so I have the honor of serving as the executive director for the Center of Educational and Community Outreach Programs, which is comprised of 3 different departments that go out into the community and serve our local students and their families. Together, we serve approximately 3,000 students every year. Pre-COVID, it was up to 7,000 local students and families that were getting our services. And we focus on improving the lives of people in the Inland Empire with a special focus on education.
Gotcha. Sounds like those numbers have changed notably since COVID.
Yeah. What we found is that, during the COVID pandemic and with the onset of remote instruction, students really got disengaged from education and kind of everything that surrounds education. I think right now the biggest challenge, Lacey, if I could go into that for a little bit, is getting those students and their families to re-engage and see the importance of getting an education and following their educational dreams.
What is the most difficult thing that the students that you're seeing in your office, what's the most difficult thing they're dealing with right now?
I would say that the most difficult thing that they're facing is just a changing world. The world around us has changed so much in the last 2 years. And, as adults, I think we have, we have to just adapt and move on. For students, the world is changing in different ways with the onset of technology and the onset of just different ways of thinking and different ways of doing. I think it's a little bit more challenging for them because they don't have the experience that us as adults can count on to kind of rely on it's going to be okay. So I think, I was at a session yesterday that was so enlightening. They were talking about just how prevalent the issue of mental health is in young people's minds and just how the world and where we're at is affecting their mental health. So I think I kind of named 2 different challenges, how the world is changing, but also how to keep their mental health in good standing.
How would you like to see us address that?
Yeah, I think we're doing a fantastic job. I really do. Collectively, I think we're doing a fantastic job. Some of my departments work with the K through 12 educational system as well. And I think it's all about training. We need to get trained on how to respond to the issues that our young people are facing. We need to be able to identify when a young person is on the spectrum and sits across from you, is on the autism spectrum and sits across from you and doesn't give you eye contact. We need to recognize that doesn't equate to the student not being motivated or not wanting to or wanting to be rude. It's not that. It's just that it's hard for them to do that. So I think with training, we'll be able to better meet students where they're at and help them with their own specific individual needs. It's not just one size fits all.
Alicia, what is the most exciting thing going on at UCR that has you excited about 2023, 2024, 2025? Looking ahead.
Okay, so I am super, super, super excited about one of my newest babies, which is the Californians for All College Corps program. It's an initiative by Governor Newsom. Brand new program that I was told was inspired by one of the programs that I oversaw at the center for many, many years, the University Eastside Community Collaborative. Anyway, this new initiative is just absolutely wonderful. The governor's office funded 45 different institutions of higher education to recruit college students and deploy them into their local communities so that they could have positive impact in those local communities, become engaged in their local communities while they're going to school. And I don't want to say the best part, but one of the best parts of it, because it's a best win. One of the best parts of the initiative is that for 450 hours that the community will be receiving of service from the college students will receive up to $10,000 for their service.
Wow!
It's split up between living allowance, monthly or biweekly living allowance, and then an educational award at the very end of their hours. But it's just a win-win-win opportunity for the students who are going to be tutored or mentored by these college students. The college students will also greatly benefit from participating in a program like this. So I'm super excited. I can go on forever.
It sounds like you should be excited about it. Alicia Velasquez from the Educational and Community Outreach Programs Office at UC Riverside. Thank you for sitting down at the Education Insight table with us here today.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
This is Education Insight, coming to you from the Toward a Shared Vision Education Summit. We'll have more in just a moment. Welcome back to Education Insight. Our interviews today come to you from the recent Education Summit in Riverside. There, about 250 top leaders in regional education converged to collaborate with those in the same position at different districts, schools, and universities. Education Insight was offered the opportunity to question our region's top educators on anything. We asked opening speaker Chancellor Kim Wilcox from the University of California, Riverside, what he sees as a shared vision by educators in the Inland Empire right now.
Already, and I think Growing Inland Achievement, the sponsor of the conference, has done a lot to help the region understand both our challenges and our resources and our opportunities. So one of our greatest advantages is the relationships we have with one another. We all know each other. We all like each other. This isn't a cutthroat big city environment. This is more of a small town. Let's roll up our sleeves and work together. And that's part of this collaborative notion. It's easy to say collaboration, another thing to actually work hard toward that success.
Yeah. What can a person in a position such as yours, Chancellor, what comes from that you can't do on any other day? I'm
a big believer in remembering that the first syllable of communication is co. If you're just talking, you're not communicating, you're just talking. Mm-hmm. Communication is one person speaking, the other person actively listening, and then an opportunity to switch that around.
Yeah.
And so for me, I get to learn a lot about people, about sometimes organizations I didn't know were here in the region, and about what they're trying to achieve, what they have achieved, and a chance for us to find out how we can be complementary.
Tell us a little bit about what's new and what's happening at UCR. Judging from what we've already heard in the conference, a lot of changes going on. Yeah,
there's two ways to characterize it. One is a continued direction, and we have been growing, and not just in terms of enrollment and people, but in terms of expertise and national prowess for a while now, and that continues. In particular, we've turned our attention to building on our success with students. We're one of the few places in the country where pretty much all our students graduate at the same rate. Our Pell students, our poorer students, graduate at the same rate as our non-Pell students. Those are unique characteristics. We want to build on that value set and really focus on the broader community. So for us, the economy of the Inland Empire is crucial for our future. We as a university are going to thrive if the community thrives, and we think we have a responsibility to help the community do just that.
One of our interview guests was Dalen Montgomery. He's the director of enrollment at the School of Education at the University of Redlands. I asked him what he sees as our biggest struggle to local colleges and universities right now.
I'll pick two if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
One is just affordability. I meet very few people who don't have to worry about money. We all have that challenge. And education is a big investment. I mean, the costs are high. So that's a challenge for everybody. That's also a challenge for schools because educating people is just not profitable.
Yeah.
Right? It requires everybody who has something or knows something to spend all of that capital giving it to somebody else.
Yeah.
That's an expensive thing. So that's one challenge that we're working to overcome to make education affordable. And then the second part is just what people on the street think they know about education and what's really going on. Sometimes those don't exactly line up. So I think there are a lot of opportunities here for kids and for adults to learn and to grow and advance, but they don't always know where to go to get the help they need. They don't know what those opportunities are. So it's this challenge of getting the resources and opportunities connected to the people that want or need to take advantage of those.
Yeah. One of our speakers today, Dr. Carlos Ayala, said, and I quote, "Our ability to work together is what will accelerate real transformational change." What kinds of good can come from a truly united front like we are trying to build here today?
We always talk about economies of scale, right? When you can pool your resources, and especially when it comes to social capital, not just money, it adds up to more than the individual parts, right? So it's the 1 + 1 = 5 sort of scenario. So when people with different ideas, people coming from different positions, people in different segments of society can all work together to build a society that's sustainable and upward bound, I think we can produce more than any one of us would on our own, even if we're as efficient and as good on our own as we could possibly be.
Dalen Montgomery, the Director of Enrollment at the School of Education at the University of Redlands. Before you go, I want to ask you one last question.
You can ask me as many as you want.
All right, so somebody said on the microphone today, they said, "It is my hope and my expectation and my demand that everyone who's here, listen carefully, hear something that you can grab, put in your pocket, and take with you in how you do work and what you do at your own particular place of education." What's that nugget going to be for you?
What's that one thing that I can grab and put in my pocket and take home?
So far.
So I had a great opportunity to listen to some of our community college partners, and they were talking about in their counseling department, which I'm in enrollment, not in counseling, so
Right.
I'm thinking, why am I listening to them? But they do a great job in an onboarding assessment of identifying what the needs of those students are up front so that they can deliver the supports they need quicker. And in hearing them talk about that for community colleges and for their student services, really helped me realize we can get even earlier than that. We can get in the admissions process where there's plenty of questions that we can ask. If we ask them in the right way, that we can get our incoming students more aligned with the help they need quicker and also have the data in that process to be able to assess at the back end whether or not it's being effective, whether we're delivering it efficiently. So that's something I can turn around with today that I've learned.
Yeah. Dalen, thanks for sitting at the Education Insight table.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
One of the keynote speakers from the recent Education Summit in Riverside was Drew Koch. He is the CEO of the Gardner Institute, which helps struggling schools get more students to graduation. The Gardner Institute has been called in to help some schools in this region recently, so I asked him to describe the work they do.
We are a not-for-profit that works with colleges and universities and educators across the U.S. To examine their structures, their policies, their practices, and redesign them so that every student can graduate. Right. So we principally work with institutions and or educators. They in turn work with the students.
All over the country.
All over the country, yeah. And we're fortunate to be working now in California, working with a number of institutions in the Inland Empire, and we have a long history of working with California institutions as well.
How do we rank amongst all of these other communities across the country that you have worked with when it comes to helping our students make it through the whole process?
Sure. I'm going to tweak the phrase if I could a bit, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of rankings, but I'll rate, right? And I'll say rate because rating is about, building from strengths and improving. I would say the Inland Empire is doing bold and very noteworthy work, particularly with and through growing inland achievement and the institutions that are part of that. I think the collective impact in the community of practice that have come together through GIA and the leadership with GIA is something that other regions should emulate if they're not already doing so. So in that regard, I would say the Inland Empire rates very highly. And, one of the reasons why I'm fortunate to be able to work with it is because of the leadership with GIA. I wish that existed in more communities and more regions.
Do events like this that bring the superintendents, the chancellors, the community college, and the university presidents and nonprofits that bring the leaders of all those into the same room, does that make a difference in helping those students get through that process?
I'm going to go with a yes and.
Oh, good.
Right? And I'm going to go with a yes and there because in my work, and I've been doing this about 30 years now, so I still have miles to go before I rest, but I have a few miles behind me, right? And in my work, in the absence of convenings like this and bringing partners and collaborators together from across sectors, you really need them. But also in my experience, events in and of themselves are not the thing that does it, right? It has to be part of a broader strategy, a broader opportunity that help those who attend these meetings apply what they're hearing and learning to their work within and across institutions and the systems, the higher education or educational systems in a region. So the short answer is yes, and you need more than just these events, right?
Yeah. When communities like ours can't get enough students all the way through the process, what do you generally see as the first signs of that, or the causes?
Well, one thing I will say is that it's not uncommon that well-intentioned educators will turn and examine the students. That is understandable in the same way that doctors would examine what conditions or, circumstances do patients bring. What we also need to do is the same thing that healthcare has done, which is examine the systems that support the students and support education and families. So when we talk a bit about causes, in our work, what we're finding a lot of it is unexamined, unjust design. And by unjust design, we mean experiences where race, ethnicity, family income, zip codes are the best predictors of not only who gains access, but who succeeds in post-secondary education. So examining that, if we want to talk about causes, what are the structures that uphold that? And then how do we as educators, educational leaders, both in classrooms, in administrative suites, how do we shape things so that every student can graduate, right? And so, again, I want to say most of the causes are within our control. I was having a conversation with Chancellor Wilcox, and we were sort of discussing the fact that often it's not uncommon to point to a previous educational experience and say, well, if only there was better preparation in that sector. But it's also often the institutions that graduate the students that are preparing those teachers, right? So that can't be the response, right? Yeah. Systemically, we're in control of a lot of these pieces, and so we need to examine them and reconfigure and sometimes completely redesign them so that, again, every student can graduate.
What's the most meaningful conversation that you see happening in this conference this week?
One of the most meaningful pieces that's come out of this is the discussion around poverty and about uplifting the community and using GIA or an entity like GIA to help with that. Our issue broadly in the United States, and I would say, with what I know of the Inland Empire and the Inland Empire, isn't necessarily about resources. It's about how those resources are employed and deployed. So that earlier I said race, ethnicity, that certainly factors in. But family income aren't the best predictors of who succeeds. That's one of the elements I've heard early, and I will assume I will hear throughout. The other piece that has been a theme is not stated this way, but shared and collective impact, right?
Yeah.
What is particularly laudatory about the work that is happening here is that it's 18 post-secondary education institutions working together in this portion of the country. Again, that's a model worth emulating for the good. We have heard a bit around workforce development. That is vital and that is important, particularly as we think about poverty and the impact of poverty. I think we also need to think about societal development and the development of voters and not just an educated workforce, but an educated citizenry. And so these are all themes that I've heard so far, and I really like, right?
Yeah. The Gardner Institute describes you as a staunch advocate and leader of efforts that increase student access to and ultimately completion of post-secondary education. Over the past few years, and on Education Insight, we've had a number of guests that have discussed this. Millions of dollars in grant money just left on the table because the Pell Grant and financial aid applications were too difficult for the student, the potential student, or their parents to fill out. What can those in education do to change that? So many of our guests had no answer.
I think a lot of it has to go with, are we designing this so that the students with the least knowledge about how higher ed works can actually access and succeed in higher education? And by the way, I'm not going with a deficit mindset and blaming the students. I'm actually blaming the education institutions. You know, we've often quit, myself and the two co-founders of the organization, Dr. Betsy Barefoot and Dr. John Gardner, that if a lot of college presidents have ever filled out financial aid forms, they'd be changed overnight, right? So, and it's not just about financial aid, it's about how these systems are structured by well-intentioned administrators, bureaucrats, both at the federal, state, and local levels and institutional levels. Not all of that is in one person's or one institution's control. As a matter of fact, a lot isn't. But there are collectively, which is why having 18 institutions working together in the Inland Empire, there's power there. So to get back to what can be done about millions of dollars of Pell Grant being left on the table, it's about eliminating barriers to access to Pell monies. It's about eliminating barriers associated with prior wealth or lack thereof. You know, I've shared, my parents immigrated, and I will share later today, my parents were immigrants to the U.S. We did not have any idea what the financial aid system was like, and I didn't fill out financial aid forms until my junior year of college. And when I did, I qualified for need-based aid. That literally was due to ignorance, right? So it's not the qualifying for need-based aid, but the fact that I didn't fill it out till junior year. So I think that's sort of, and shame on institutions for allowing that to happen, right? And I'm not blaming the institution, I'm naming them as agents for change in all of this. So institutions of many types, both simplifying the process and then providing structures to help families and students in particular gain access is part of not only what needs to be done, but what we're responsible and called to do.
You're listening to Education Insight. This week, we're sharing several short interviews from what has been called a unique education summit in the U.S. But this gathering took place here in the Inland Empire just days ago. Our microphones were there as the Inland Empire's education leaders left think tanks and strategy groups, all aimed at connecting people with similar positions so that they together could find paths to greater student success. Wayne Fletcher is the Associate Provost at Cal Baptist University. He stopped by our booth. So I asked him to explain the differences between public universities and colleges and private universities, such as Cal Baptist.
There's actually a lot. It starts with funding. As a private, you are funded through tuition.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you're Harvard, Stanford, and you've got huge endowments, different conversation, but that's very few privates. Most are funded 90+% of the institutional revenues coming in through tuition fees, housing, things of that nature. The publics much more state support into that system, and so they have to wrestle with politicians and what's my budget next year? I don't know. So that's a very different facet there in the funding side. I think probably the other big difference is you look at a UC, they're very heavily focused on research. CSU, not so much. As a private, certainly we have research, but we are a teaching institution first and foremost, and that's what we strive to do well, is bring in students and help them achieve their objective. You know, our motto is for students to live their purpose. So that is our goal, is to get them through so they can live that purpose that we believe God has given to them in their lives. So you have a little bit different structures. The publics are generally going to have unionized faculty, staff, whereas the privates generally do not. So that in and of itself creates certain challenges to being nimble. When you have to get union approval to make these changes, can't just change a job description. Privates have much more flexibility in being able to quickly adapt.
What brings you to the Toward a Shared Vision conference here in Riverside today?
California Baptist University is a school around just over 11,000 students. We are a Hispanic serving institution with about 38% of our population Hispanic, which has been a shift for our institution over the last 12 years or so. And so with that change in demographic come different challenges in helping students succeed. Once again, an institution that was built around one population has got to shift its thinking, and that doesn't come naturally. So events like this really help us surface questions. Rarely do you find the solutions or the answers, but it fosters the conversation, the dialogue, and the questions that allow us to start looking for what are the barriers to success? What are we not seeing? Where are our blinders? And how do we remove those so we can do whatever we can to help students succeed?
What are you hearing that you can take back and improve what's going on at Cal Baptist in some way?
How do we become more effective in communicating with our students, particularly our students who may come from academically disadvantaged backgrounds? Is it a text? Is it an email? Well, we know that's not working. Is it a post? How do we reach out to these students? How do we make sure that they really understand what resources are there for them? It's one thing institutions often say, well, we have this and this and this, and students, all they have to do is go access it. Great. Do they know it's there?
Yeah.
Do they know how to access it? Are there cultural barriers that perhaps are preventing them from accessing it? Pride, whatever it may be. How do we make sure that we are meeting students where they are in order to help them get to where they need to be?
Are you finding that other universities are meeting those students and communicating, connecting with them differently than some of the ways that you might be at your university, or that each university is doing it somehow differently?
Everybody's doing it slightly different, and which makes sense. We all have slightly different campus cultures as well. And I don't think anybody's actually found the silver bullet. That's the problem. If somebody said, here's how you do it, then and it works for everybody, of course, that would be really simple. It's not the way it works. Everybody's trying to figure this out, and it's kind of like, I worked for a publicly traded organization in the past. If you had a better way to do something, you didn't tell anybody. That's a trade secret.
Yeah.
Higher education's not like that. If you find a better way to build a mousetrap, you share it, and everybody wants to use that. But figure out how to effectively communicate. It's little steps at a time. Try it. What works? Oh, social media changed. They're no longer using Facebook. Now they're on TikTok, right? So it's a continually evolving process. What worked yesterday doesn't necessarily work tomorrow. What works with one demographic doesn't necessarily work with another demographic. So it's continually trying to adjust, shift, and emerge the processes in order to meet students where they are.
Gotcha. So what do you see as the most exciting things going on in our region as far as education is concerned? Post-secondary. Okay.
Post-secondary. I think the most exciting things, really what GIA has been so involved in bringing education together. I work for the public system, the CSUs, UC, the community college system. They've always worked pretty well together, but the private universities have been sitting on the outside doing whatever we do and attracting students because more of our mission as for us, a faith-based institution, things of that nature. But now bringing people together. When I sit down and talk with my colleagues at UCR, at CSU, talk to the folks at the community colleges, we really do all have the same objective, which is getting students into college and successfully through college, whether it's coming in through a 2-year degree transfer out of community college into a 4-year, going straight out of high school to university. None of us really, well, at the 4 years, we really don't. Community colleges, of course, they absolutely want to come to the community college first, right? From an enrollment perspective. But we want to see them succeed at the end of the day. And coming together as a community to say, how do we work more effectively together? What are you doing over there? How can I steal your idea and make it mine?
Sure.
And I think that's kind of an exciting thing, because in the past, the publics and the privates just didn't communicate. And now I think, at least in the Inland Empire, we work very collegially.
You're listening to Education Insight. I'm Lacey Kendall, and we'll have more from the Education Summit at the Riverside Convention Center in just a moment. Welcome back to Education Insight and our interviews taken at the Toward a Shared Vision Education Summit, where top education and community leaders gathered recently to find ways to increase student success in the Inland Empire. Dr. Laura Hamilton is professor and chair of sociology at the University of California, Merced, and a noted author on the problems of today's California college or university student. As one of 2 keynote speakers, she was asked to share from her research and insights on student success. I asked her to share with us her message to the Inland Empire educators.
Yeah, great. I have been there for 12 years, came there in 2012, and I'm now the professor and chair of sociology. As the chair of the department, I work to make sure that our undergraduates and graduate students and faculty are all supported. We have a really unique population of students at UC Merced, large Latinx student population, first generation, low-income students, and our graduate students also reflect that, and they're fantastic.
You're the keynote address speaker here this afternoon, and your message was extremely well received by this group of educators here from inland Southern California. Could you tell our listening audience a little bit about what the message was that you brought to Riverside today?
My focus today was on the fact that universities and colleges serving racially marginalized low-income students receive much less support, financial support, either private or also often from the state and federal government, to take care and support the mission of their universities. This is what I refer to as racial resource stratification or racial resource allocation disparities. If you look across the post-secondary system, we see a high level of segregation where Black and Latinx and Indigenous students don't attend the same colleges as their more racially advantaged peers, and the schools that they do attend do not have the same levels of public support or private support to allow those universities to do the work of making sure their students have the kinds of experiences that students at more privileged organizations do.
Do you think these people have the ability, these leaders in education that were in this room today, do they have the ability to change that?
Absolutely. I mean, purely the fact that this group exists and that there were folks across the UC system, the California state system, the community college system, folks in nonprofits, and also K through 12 people all talking about these issues, that alone says something to me, because I believe change starts with a coalition. Too often we're not talking across boundaries because we're so worried about getting a small piece of pie for our own school. That really defeats the larger purpose of thinking about this as a public investment. All of these schools, all of these systems are worthy of public investment. Together, getting that message out is how you make change.
You've written a number of books where you deal with this. I want to mention them. Broke: The Racial Consequences of Underfunding Public Universities. Another is Parenting to a Degree: How Family Matters for College Women's Success. And most recently, Paying for the Party: How College Maintains Inequality. What are you most concerned about right now? What worries you at night?
I am very worried that higher education is going to turn into the GoFundMe model, which is only private money coming in is the only way to do things, where if you shout loud enough or you have enough money to get attention and you can post your GoFundMe and hey, help us, that is not a systemic way to approach funding higher education. But we're not that far from that. As states have decreased the amount of support they provide, universities necessarily have been turning to philanthropic investment. They've been turning to corporations. They've been trying to bring in more non-resident students if you're talking about a four-year school. Those are all private sources of money. And if we turn to private sources of money, things get more inequitable because not all universities and colleges have the capacity to get those funds. The most equitable moments of higher education have occurred when it was primarily publicly funded. That's what keeps me up at night, that we're going to move away from what we know works to provide an equitable education to all Californians, to all students across the nation. If we move toward greater and greater funding from private sources, we're going to move away from that goal.
I would think, too, that another problem with that is that that GoFundMe kind of income is it's not consistent.
No, yes, it's not consistent.
It's fragile.
Yeah, and you have to keep asking for it. You can't do long-term planning because you don't know if you're going to have money for that really impactful program 2 years from now. So we need a stable source of support over time to do what we've done, what we did a long time, we did in the mid-1900s when it was primarily white students attending colleges. We expanded access to women, to immigrants, to children of farmers, and we provided a solid education. It was, as I talked about today, it was the moment when you start to see the shift in the student population where you've got large numbers of Black and Latinx students attending college, where the public sentiment around investing in higher education sours. These students deserve the same kind of investments. These students are the future, particularly in California where we see a shifting demographic. They need our state, they need our government to be backing them.
Yeah. What gets you optimistic when you're thinking about education in inland Southern California?
As we were talking about in the keynote, I mentioned sociologists are like notoriously depressing. However, there are things that really excite me, and those are primarily the students. When I look at the students in my classrooms and I talk to the graduate students that we have at our university, these students are amazing. They have a sharp knowledge of how racial, class, gender inequities happen, and they have great ideas about how to change that. So it's sort of the kids are all right is the phrase I think of whenever I think about the students that I work with. They are what gives me optimism.
And they're doing well.
And they're doing well.
Dr. Brian Haynes is the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at UCR. Now, as this conference focused on getting educators to collaborate, his team was awarded over $18 million to help local K-16 educators connect and improve. He explained that grant for us.
When I think in terms of the needs of this region, and I'm talking primarily from an educational perspective, collaboration is the only way forward. Mm-hmm. And we're seeking to create additional layers of collaboration through the K-16 Inland Empire Regional Educational Collaborative Grant, $18.1 million. We believe that the grant will be transformational. We've partnered with educators from Riverside and San Bernardino County. We anticipate collaborating with nonprofits and others who, quote unquote, are on the ground working with students daily to really, really work in a collaborative fashion to transform education throughout the region.
Okay. What is the core work of that money? I mean, now when you employ the money, what can it do that couldn't be done before that's going to bring that kind of success?
Well, renewed focus on A through G requirements, but also a focus in on working with students who might want to pursue opportunities in some of the trades as well. So really it's the focus is on education at all levels, realizing that here in the Inland Empire region in particular, educational attainment across the board is fairly low when compared to other regions in the state and certainly across the country.
Yeah. Where do you see issues that the Inland Empire has got to take care of? Now, you've been at Cal State San Bernardino and now at UCR. Your education career has taken you around our neighborhood, all right? Where are those problems that we need to fix?
I'll just go back to a word that we're talking a lot about today, collaboration. There's a lot of good work occurring in the Inland Empire region, but from my perspective, and I want to be clear, from my perspective, I view some of that work as happening in silos. And so the collaborative nature of this grant, we believe, will help to eliminate some of the siloing that's occurred and really push out in a collaborative fashion opportunities really to advance education throughout the Inland Empire region.
It's interesting that you touch on that. Today, so many people have come out of work groups that are going on, breakout sessions, and they're saying, I was hearing how other people in my position are doing it different at different schools, universities, and colleges. What kinds of lessons can people pull out of these sessions at a conference like this?
Yeah, Lacey, that's a great question, and you're absolutely correct. So one of the takeaways that we're hearing, and when I say we, I'm including colleagues in this conversation as well, is we all want similar things. We all want to improve educational attainment throughout the Inland Empire. And who is the we here that we're talking about? K through 12 educators, certainly those of us who work in the university system, but those who also work in the community college system, as well as those who are here today representing nonprofit entities. We all want the same things. And so that is another takeaway from some of the conversations that we've already heard, and we'll hear further conversations this afternoon and certainly tomorrow as well. I believe that the way we transform education in the region, again, is through collaboration. A starting point for that collaboration, obviously, is communication. I think we need to level set where we are in the region, and I think that's what is happening today and tomorrow through this GIA conference.
Yeah. Besides collaboration, what else are you really excited about when you think about 2023, 24, 25 for education in the Inland Empire?
Well, a few things. Certainly, when I think in terms of just some of the metrics that excite me, I think in terms of continuing to increase the numbers of students completing the A through G requirements, continuing to increase the percentage of students going on to college. And when I say college, community college or a four-year institution, be it here in California or even out of state. Those are just a couple of initial thoughts. But I think when I look at it from a really, really big picture, I think in terms of how those small incremental steps will be transformational to this region. The world is not perfect. We know that. But one way that you can sort of level the playing field is through education. And so from my perspective, when I think in terms of a really, really big picture opportunity, back to your question about 23, 24, 25 and beyond, is these incremental steps that hopefully we'll accomplish through this grant and other grants will really increase the educational attainment in the region. We know that education also increases opportunities to increases your salary, increases revenue generation opportunities for individuals and families. So that's sort of the transformational nature, we believe, of of this grant and again other grants that we hope will bring to the IE.
And that wraps up another edition of Education Insight. And our interviews taken from the Toward a Shared Vision Education Summit recently. We'll be back in a month to begin our third year investigating and reporting on local education. On behalf of our Education Insight team and all of those who help make this program possible, happy holidays to all of our educators and students in the Inland Empire, and to your family. I'm Lacey Kendall. Thanks for joining us.
Education Insight is produced in partnership with KVCR San Bernardino.
Our executive producer is Jacob Poor, and our production engineer is Tyler Veazey.
Alyssa Silva is our production assistant, and Lacey Kendall is your host.
Support is provided by Growing Inland Achievement, working together for inland education and economic success.
And by College Futures Foundation.
Join us again next time for
Education Insight.